policy shall be considered unconscionable if it is too unfair or oppressive to one side in the exchange. To this extent, the act of engaging of the compounding tyrannical policies of the white supremacist Confederacy in their acceleration of unitary executive theory, or the function of the creation of the king in order to decentralize to an uncomfortable amount the powers of the unlimited king into the clan, that they might distribute amongst the white supremacists infinite powers without restraint or connection to any central objective or thinking beyond their druid religious function, certifying the function of their occult ritual in their deal with the devil, where they have engaged in a system of sacrificing souls in order and persons in order to acquire more power and influence, that they might influence their white supremacist communism, asserting their destruction of the United States, which to this extent you would actively have many of them who would have needed to have arranged the wars in the Middle East so that they can train urban warfare, so that they can perfect the function of their anti-masculine transsexual community of Confederate white trash to be able to defeat an inferior arbitrary militia of hodgepodge equipped parties, such as, but is not limited to, the United States and its Second Amendment capacity to arm the various civilians by its ability to have acquired and distributed arms and ammunition so that they might be maliciously conquered in a similar military strategy when they betray the United States, which they hold in highest contempt, which, engaging in the function of arbitrary terrorist operations, including the various definitions of the hate crime, such as the social violence, the political violence, the economic violence, in wars of attrition in order to engage in the exhaustion of the parties so that they, against the Constitution, might be collapsed in their status by virtue of their disconnection to the vital aspects of the normal civilian activities in the active compounding function of the trained objective of psychopathy brutalized into the mind of the degenerate half-wits carrying out the Confederate orders to engage in the war crimes that they might destroy the United States in a permanent state and deliver a permanent state to the right of conquest to its adversaries. Instead of the security defending against those threats, it is the active distributor and seller, claiming that it has immunity to treason. Now, the struggling session and false accusations, which generates the compounding function in the communist revolution function for the white supremacists, focuses on the KKK's hate crime operations from their surveillance contractors, which then gives them the fake position of the private sector, which then facilitates the function of the normal private sector KKK hate crime operations, which then is then mixed in with the government, which then gives them cover for the other operations. Now, the government not being able to do the thing and the civilians not being able to do it is then mixed in a blatant lie. And as we all know from Hitler, if you're going to lie, then lie big and lie often enough, and then they'll start believing it. Or the communist revolutionaries function of humiliate the person with the opposition while one person provides legitimate, competent arguments, just harass them and seek humiliation, put them in front of important people, and then actively try and humiliate them, and then collapse that function, which then creates a position of demoralization, which then engages in the function of the person collapsing into and repeating of the lie, which then is the conquest by the propaganda, materializing the function of the innocent communist target who then has to repent to the state for the crimes imagined by the state in order to be rejoined into the Communist Party or to be rejected by the society. Once they've accepted compliance with the thing, accepting that they are the thing, they then can be dispensed of as they've confessed to court that they are guilty of the thing and that they are the thing, and that materially makes them uh, useful radicalization terrorist, and therefore engaged in the function of their militia operations against the general public, having been captured, materializing the continuation of this function in an undead campaign to engage in the eradication of the human soul in the general public until it is demoralized and collapsed as a collective society and subordinates to the communist revolutionaries, at which point the revolutionaries in that militia become counterproductive and must be destroyed, at which point the function of anyone engaging with the Confederate Revolution will have the same thing, as they are systemically being trapped inside each of their deals with devil in order to gain power, in order to conquer the United States, which then leaves them vulnerable. So when the revolution is finished and they begin to turn order under similar strategies as Mao's revolution, when Mao ordered the revolutionaries to turn on each other because this group is condemned and they all have to fight each other in order to prove which one is loyal to the Communist Party, even though they're attacking their own groups, purifying the function. You then engage in the function of the strategic weaknesses arranged, at which point the preordained communist arrangement of the right type of whites as the only ones who survive it, as everyone else are eradicated in the Civil War operation from the white supremacists, functioning as the classic purge, which then materializes the function of their murder-suicide as the murder of the general public in their hate crimes becomes an act of suicide, of the inevitability of that trap, which will then consume their lives as an enemy of the revolution that they so vehemently and heartfelt supported. Now, the function of these fraudulent schemes engages in the function of saying that the exception to the rule is that in the direct violation, you create an exception that doesn't exist, similar to the function of the non government contractors being able to commit the crime that civilians can't do, that the government isn't allowed to do, and therefore the function of the plausible deniability and the decentralization of the KKK activities in order to engage in the criminal subversions, thus stating that there is no remedy to a Confederate spell. To this extent, the engagement of breaking the law in every various kind of way materializes in the function of specifically how they lie to the government, such as with their occult rituals, which facilitate the function of the double agent judges engaging in the insurrection, ignoring the responsibilities, knowing that there's fraud submitted to the court, or that there is contempt for Congress, or any of the other things, which is then ignored by the use of the special tool for the magic, which then materializes them ignoring it, which then facilitates their ability to push through their fraudulent outcome, which they are too lazy to accomplish as effeminate transsexuals. Their lack of self respect and masculinity facilitates the systemic degrading of their capacities and thus requires the handicap or the making it easier in order to accomplish their goals such as using these lies in order to engage in the subversions, such as when they were lying us into war through the previous presidents, such as the lying into the Iran war or any of the other Middle Eastern wars. Most of them are based upon fraud, engaging in the illegitimate and fraudulent function of quote unquote enhanced interrogation, which is fraudulent and destroys the evidence and isn't usable. But the extortion from that pain, similar to the function of the communist humiliation ritual, facilitates the breaking down of the party into the confirmation of whatever script that they had prearranged. They need the script to say XYZ, and so they'll abuse the person until they confirm XYZ, then confirming whatever nonsense they jacked off to before, which then confirms their extortion racket to the infinite arrangement, similar to the function of the Confederates threatening of the Russians in order to compel the special operations to invade Ukraine, which was triggered by the Confederates' coup inside of Ukraine, threatening Russian security operations, materializing the function of these extortions as they hyper-accelerate the propaganda of Putin bad, um, engages in the function of the hyper-support of the Ukrainians without actually supporting the Ukrainians, as the function was an extortion racket against the Ukrainians in order to make them pay in lives and money in order to feed into their corruption, which then facilitates the war effort, which then destroys and collapses the Russians, facilitating the easy cleanup of the Russians in the communist revolution from the United States and the West, which then destroys the Russians, which engaged in the former Soviet Union's demoralization tactics in order to invade the United States and create a communist revolution, what is referred to as the Confederacy, as is promoted by Lindsey Graham in his immunities of the government from rationality, incompetence, and reason, and the non-reviewability on the basis of the fact that they are in fact guilty and it is in fact fraud, as the scam artists do not have any rational argument to their activities, which are actively counterproductive to any of the missions that they would have conducted, as it is exclusively an extortion racket in order to fund those uh, resources to their special interests, according to the white supremacist communism, which has promised these various payouts and additional contracts, etc., according to their black market money laundering operations, in order to manage the system by their criminal programs. At which point, the mob, having taken over the United States by the Confederacy, is a parasite of white trash who create, like other parasites, a diseased chemical, which then creates a mixed signal to the immune system in order to fool the immune system into believing that the parasite is a part of the host when it is actively killing it, or alternatively, immunity from treason. Now, those who want to defend this mechanism of mostly fascist, a little bit communist operation from the Confederates and their satanic magic rituals materialize the misunderstanding and posture under their lies that it is somehow American, whereas the function of it being capitalist and other alignments with the United States Constitution qualifying it as legitimate being disqualified by the violation reaffirmed by the magic makes it communism with American characteristics. Or the function of the white supremacist extremist who says not one drop of black blood would be accepted in the racist policy from the Confederates, which, having been destroyed, were tolerated to allow control over their system and retaking of the arrangements by not properly dealing with the traitors, allowing for them to sustain their structures for their hate group, known as the KKK, and other operations, which then strategically protected and allowed to accelerate into the function of its infiltration as insurgent terrorists into the United States government, which, once properly embedded, would then disassociate with its Klan and Confederate ideals, uh, pretending some kind of insult or injured feelings by the assertion that they were dishonorable Confederates or something along those lines, being most pouty when accused most accurately and correctly by the investigator, creating such distractions by their psyops, such as quote unquote conspiracy theorists, which then facilitates the assumption of the illegitimacy of the thing, allowing people to ignore it, when in fact conspiracy theory is the function of conducting a legitimate investigation, which every policeman and detective does, which of course is something that the Confederates are allergic to, as all of their operations to excuse their force are based on fraud and willful lies, for the cycling of the satanic magic, such as from uh, the Soviet Union, which has demoralized them in the creation of the conversion into the communism, such as the practices in the Gulag Archipelago for the functional materialization of the rape culture, which is derived by the function of changing the United States military from one of merit into a function of the hierarchy of the insurgents which acquired their position, and therefore they get arrogant and haughty and mad and upset at any presumption of anyone that is capable of acquiring these positions that are not a part of the corruption, such as their characterization for David as the patriarch, who would have been the intelligence oversight top rank general, giving David the authority over the president as the checks and balances has Congress's authority over the executive. And to this extent, the function of the oversight materializes the use of military force for military police and investigations against misuses of the executive, which then can be enforced, which then is retaliated against, and thus the position of their argument to defend themselves is against law enforcement for sedition of the legitimate function of the government, collapsing the use of the government in favor of the parasite or the immunity of enemies foreign and domestic, which then materializes the plot of their connections in the Middle East, which then facilitated their training operations to create the 9/11 event, which is 100% Lindsey Graham's Confederates plot in a Northwoods operation in order to collapse the United States by the progressing of Confederate policies against the Constitution for the eradication of the very ideals and identity of the United States and its population, commonly referred to as the demoralization process facilitated by the Soviet Union. Otherwise, how would avowed communists such as uh, Brennan in the CIA or James Comey in the FBI or any of the others would have been able to have acquired their positions, such as, but is not limited to, the function of